Breaking news from Zambia. President Hakainde Hichilema delivers a powerful and unexpected national address that has sent shockwaves across the country and beyond. Zambia stunned. What President Hichilema just announced changes everything. He finally spoke. Hichilema's national address has everyone talking. Unthinkable words from Hichilema, Zambians in shock after this address. The speech that shook Zambia. What's next after Hichilema's shocking address? Zambia at a crossroads. Hichilema breaks silence in explosive national speech. Hichilema just set the nation on fire. You won't believe what he said. Zambians are divided after this powerful message from President Hichilema. National shockwave. Hichilema's address leaves no one unmoved. Bold or risky. Hichilema's national address sparks heated reactions across Zambia. He named names and dropped bombshells. Watch Hichilema's historic speech now. In this historic speech, President Hichilema tackles pressing national issues, responds to growing public concerns, and outlines his vision for Zambia's future amid regional tensions and economic challenges. What did he say about Zambia's economy, the rising calls for sovereignty, and growing continental alliances like the AES, Alliance of Sahel States? How is the president positioning Zambia in the face of global pressures from the West, the EU, and international financial institutions? In this video, full breakdown of Hichilema's national speech. Reactions from Zambians across the country. Analysis of the potential impact on Zambia's leadership, governance, and foreign policy. Connection to Pan-African leaders like Ibrahim Traoré and the push for African unity. Don't miss this turning point moment in Zambia's political history. Like, share and subscribe for more updates on Zambian politics, African leadership, and breaking news across the continent. Comprehensive analysis of Hichilema's economic and foreign policy stance in Zambia. What did Hichilema say about Zambia's economy? President Hakainde Hichilema, elected in August 2021, inherited an economy in severe distress, characterized by a $17.3 billion external debt, 115% of GDP, inflation peaking at 24.4% in 2021, and a kwacha that had lost 50% of its value against the dollar under his predecessor, Edgar Lungu. In his February 24, 2023, address to the National Assembly on National Values and Principles, Hichilema outlined a multi-pronged strategy to stabilize and grow Zambia's economy, emphasizing fiscal discipline, debt restructuring, and leveraging copper production for global markets. Key economic points: debt restructuring and IMF support. Hichilema secured a $1.4 billion extended credit facility from the IMF in December 2022, a critical step to address Zambia's default on Eurobonds in 2020, first African nation to do so in the pandemic era. He described the debt as a python around our necks, noting that 1/3 is owed to China, with additional debt to Western creditors and commercial lenders. The G20 Common Framework facilitated negotiations, with China agreeing to co-chair debt talks, enabling progress by 2023. Macroeconomic stabilization. By June 2022, inflation dropped to 9.7%, and the kwacha appreciated by 18.5%, becoming one of the world's best-performing currencies that year. This was driven by tight monetary policy, raising the policy rate to 9%, and increased foreign exchange inflows from mining exports. Hichilema emphasized maintaining fiscal deficits below 3% in the medium term, aligning with West African Economic and Monetary Union (WEMU) guidelines, though he acknowledged short-term flexibility for social spending. Copper and green economy. Zambia, the world's 8th largest copper producer, accounts for 75% of its export earnings. Hichilema aims to triple production to 3 million tons annually by 2032, capitalizing on global demand for copper in electric vehicles and renewable energy. He highlighted partnerships with Canada, the Netherlands, and the DRC to develop battery value chains, including a 2022 agreement with the DRC for cobalt and copper processing. Domestic revenue mobilization. To reduce aid dependency, Hichilema focused on formalizing artisanal mining, which employs over 60,000 Zambians, to increase tax revenues. He also stabilized the mining tax regime to attract foreign direct investment, FDI, which reached $1.2 billion in 2022, primarily from Canada and Switzerland. However, economist Grieve Chelwa notes resistance from artisanal miners fearing loss of livelihoods, complicating formalization efforts. Social investments. The Constituency Development Fund, CDF, was increased from $90,000 to $1.4 million per constituency to fund rural infrastructure, schools, and health facilities. Hichilema also recruited 40,000 teachers and health workers to address unemployment, over 20% in urban areas, and fulfill campaign promises of free primary education. Challenges. Hichilema acknowledged that economic recovery is a long-term process, with debt servicing consuming 60% of public expenditure, limiting funds for social services. The removal of fuel subsidies, mandated by the IMF, raised living costs, sparking protests in Lusaka in 2023. The IMF's Regional Economic Outlook, April 2025, warns of a recovery interrupted in sub-Saharan Africa, with Zambia's growth downgraded to 2.8% in 2024 due to global commodity price volatility and drought-induced agricultural losses. What did Hichilema say about rising calls for sovereignty? Hichilema's rhetoric on sovereignty ties economic independence to governance reforms and regional cooperation. In his July 17, 2022, speech at the African Union mid-year coordination meeting in Lusaka, he emphasized that sovereignty requires African nations to address internal challenges like corruption, poor governance, and economic mismanagement. We must be clear what we want for our own economies, for our own businesses to grow and sustain those businesses, he stated, advocating for domestic resource mobilization over reliance on foreign aid. Sovereignty through economic control. Hichilema views Zambia's copper wealth as a tool for sovereignty, aiming to redirect mining revenues to national development rather than foreign firms. His push to formalize artisanal mining and negotiate better terms with creditors like China reflects this. In a 2023 AFP interview, he rejected geopolitical alignment, stating, "That sort of argument belongs to the past. The world will be more progressive when we work with each other," signaling a pragmatic approach to sovereignty that balances global partnerships with national interests. Domestic governance. Hichilema's zero tolerance for corruption is framed as strengthening sovereignty by ensuring public resources benefit Zambians. He strengthened the Anti-Corruption Commission and recovered $50 million in misappropriated funds by 2023. However, critics, including former Archbishop Telesphore Mpundu, argue that his administration's arrests of opposition leaders and failure to reform the judiciary undermine sovereignty, echoing tactics of Lungu's regime. Ex-posts from a Zambian watchdog highlight accusations of ethnic bias in appointments, particularly favoring the Bemba and Tonga groups, which fuels perceptions of compromised national unity. Global context. Hichilema's vote against Russia's invasion of Ukraine at the UN in March 2022 underscored his commitment to international law and sovereignty, breaking ranks with neighbors like South Africa and Zimbabwe, which abstained. This drew praise from the US and EU but sparked domestic criticism for aligning with Western interests, particularly after establishing a U.S. Office of Security Cooperation in Lusaka. Hichilema countered by emphasizing positive neutrality, balancing relations with China, India, and the UAE to protect Zambia's autonomy. What did Hichilema say about growing continental alliances like the AES? Hichilema has not explicitly addressed the alliance of Sahel States, AES, formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger in September 2023, in his public speeches. His focus remains on established regional bodies like the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and the African Union, AU, reflecting Zambia's geographic and political distance from the Sahel. In his 2022 Australian dollar speech, he championed increased cooperation and integration of African states to achieve Agenda 2063's goals of inclusive development, emphasizing the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, and SADC's role in regional stability. Regional cooperation. Hichilema highlighted Zambia's contributions to SADC, including deploying 900 troops to counter insurgency in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado region. He supported infrastructure projects like the Lobito Corridor, a $1.6 billion initiative linking Zambia, the DRC, and Angola, funded partly by the EU and US under the G7's Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. This contrasts with the AES's rejection of Western-backed frameworks like ECOWAS, which Traoré accused of betraying Sahelian nations through sanctions. Hichilema's approach aligns with AU goals of economic integration, avoiding the AES's anti-imperialist rhetoric. Implicit stance on AES. While Hichilema has not commented directly on the AES, his commitment to SADC and AU frameworks suggests a preference for inclusive, multilateral cooperation over the AES's confrontational stance. The AES's withdrawal from ECOWAS in January 2025, citing its Western alignment, has deepened regional fragmentation, a trend Hichilema likely views as counterproductive. His engagement with the EU, evidenced by a €600 million peace facility for African security, indicates a willingness to work with Western partners, unlike the AES's pivot to Russia and China. How is Hichilema positioning Zambia amid global pressures? Hichilema's foreign policy of positive neutrality navigates pressures from the West, EU, China, and international financial institutions, IFIs, by diversifying partnerships and prioritizing economic stability. Western relations. Hichilema has revitalized ties with the US, UK, and EU, leveraging Zambia's democratic credentials and copper wealth. His 2021 UN General Assembly visit and meetings with US Vice President Kamala Harris and EU President Charles Michel secured $1.6 billion in EU investments for mining, energy, and agriculture by 2023. The EU's support for the Lobito Corridor and Zambia's debt restructuring aligns with Hichilema's economic goals. However, the US's 2025 aid cuts under the Trump administration, described as a harsh slap, prompted Hichilema to emphasize domestic revenue mobilization. China and emerging powers. Maintaining ties with China, Zambia's largest creditor, Hichilema secured Beijing's cooperation in debt talks during a 2022 call with President Xi Jinping. He has also pursued FDI from India, Japan, and the UAE, with the UAE investing $300 million in Zambia's transport sector in 2024. This diversification reduces reliance on any single power, protecting Zambia from geopolitical leverage, IFIs, and debt. The IMF's $1.4 billion facility and World Bank support have been critical, but their austerity conditions, including subsidy cuts, have raised living costs, fueling protests. Hichilema's finance minister, Sidambiko Muzokotwane, has pushed for broader tax bases and fewer exemptions to raise the tax-to-GDP ratio, as noted in the IMF's 2025 Regional Economic Outlook. However, endemic poverty, 40% live below $2.15 per day, limits revenue potential, and debt restructuring remains incomplete, with commercial creditors delaying agreements. Domestic backlash. Critics, including the Patriotic Front, PF, and former Archbishop Mpundu, accuse Hichilema of being a Western stooge, citing the U.S. military office and visa waivers for Western tourists. Posts from @Zambian Watchdog amplify these sentiments, alleging he prioritizes foreign interests over Zambians. Hichilema counters by framing his policies as pragmatic, ensuring Zambia remains a beacon of peace while attracting investment. Full breakdown of Hichilema's national speech, the February 24, 2023, address to the National Assembly on National Values and Principles, is Hichilema's most comprehensive speech on his economic and governance vision. Below is a detailed breakdown based on National Assembly records and related sources. Context. Delivered 6 months after securing the IMF deal, the speech aimed to reassure Zambians of progress amid economic hardship and outline a roadmap for recovery. Broadcast live on ZNBC, it targeted both domestic and international audiences, reinforcing Zambia's image as a stable democracy. Key themes. Economic stabilization. Hichilema highlighted the kwacha's 18.5% appreciation and inflation's drop to 9.7%, crediting tight fiscal and monetary policies. He outlined debt restructuring progress, with $6 billion of commercial debt under negotiation, emphasized tripling copper production and formalizing artisanal mining to boost revenues. Projecting $2 billion in additional exports by 2027, the CDF's increase to $1.4 million per constituency was framed as empowering local governance and addressing rural poverty. Governance and anti-corruption. Hichilema reiterated zero tolerance for corruption, citing $50 million recovered from misappropriated funds. He strengthened the Anti-Corruption Commission and granted autonomy to the Inspector General of Finances, emphasized constitutionalism and rule of law, promising to protect free speech and private property, though he avoided addressing opposition arrests. Social development. The recruitment of 40,000 teachers and health workers was highlighted as a job creation milestone. Alongside free primary education for 2 million students, he acknowledged challenges from drought and global commodity price volatility, committing to agricultural subsidies and irrigation projects. Foreign policy and regional role. Hichilema positioned Zambia as a regional leader, citing SADC troop deployments in Mozambique and support for AFCFTA. He called for global cooperation on climate change and pandemics, urging faster vaccine distribution to Africa, stating, "The first world will not achieve much by vaccinating only their people." Tone and delivery. Hichilema's tone was optimistic but pragmatic, acknowledging the deep hole of economic challenges while projecting confidence in reforms. He used inclusive language, addressing fellow Zambians and emphasizing collective effort. The speech was structured to balance domestic hope with international credibility, appealing to investors and creditors. Omissions and criticisms. Hichilema avoided addressing allegations of ethnic bias, particularly favoring Bemba and Tonga groups, which has fueled tensions in PF strongholds. He sidestepped concerns about opposition arrests, including PF leaders charged with sedition, and judicial stagnation, despite promising institutional reforms. Critics, including Neo Simultanei of the Center for Policy Dialogue, argue the speech glossed over austerity's impact, with fuel price hikes increasing transport costs by 30% in 2023.
Reactions from Zambians across the country. Zambian reactions to Hichilema's policies and the 2023 speech are polarized, reflecting economic challenges and political divisions. Supporters urban and UPND strongholds. In Lusaka, southern, and western provinces, UPND supporters praise Hichilema for stabilizing the kwacha and securing IMF support. Civil servants and teachers, benefiting from new jobs, view him as a fixer. Posts from @Zambian Patriot highlight CDF-funded projects like boreholes and clinics, visible in rural areas. Urban youth, who voted 70% for Hichilema in 2021, appreciate his focus on mining and entrepreneurship, with FDI inflows boosting optimism in the Copperbelt. Business community. The Zambia Chamber of Commerce and Industry lauded Hichilema's tax stability measures, with FDI rising 20% in 2022. Mining firms like First Quantum Minerals reported improved relations with the government. Critics' opposition and rural areas. The PF, dominant in northern and Copperbelt provinces, accuses Hichilema of ethnic favoritism and Western alignment. Former Archbishop Mpundu's 2022 statement, "Everyone feels cheated," reflects frustration over rising living costs, with maize meal prices up 25% after subsidy cuts. Artisanal miners in the Copperbelt protest formalization, fearing loss of income, as noted by Chelwa. Protests and social media. Lusaka protests in 2023, reported by Africa News, targeted fuel price hikes, with transport costs squeezing urban poor. Posts from @Zambian Watchdog amplify accusations of Hichilema being a Western puppet, citing the U.S. military office and visa policies favoring Western tourists. Rural farmers in Eastern Province report fertilizer shortages, exacerbated by global supply chain disruptions post-Ukraine war. Regional variations. Southern and Western provinces. Strong UPND support drives positive reactions, with CDF projects visible in schools and health posts. Community leaders report improved local governance. Copperbelt and Northern provinces. PF strongholds express skepticism, with ethnic tensions fueling distrust. Posts highlight job losses in mining due to automation, despite FDI growth. Rural versus urban divide. Rural areas welcome CDF but struggle with agricultural inputs, while urban areas face cost of living pressures but benefit from job creation. Analysis of potential impact on Zambia's leadership, governance, and foreign policy leadership. Hichilema's leadership is bolstered by international praise, with EU Parliament President Roberta Metsola calling Zambia a mature democracy. His economic expertise and global outreach, including 15 international trips in 2022, enhance his stature. However, domestic challenges threaten his legitimacy. Allegations of ethnic bias and opposition crackdowns, with 12 PF leaders arrested by 2023, echo Lungu's authoritarian tactics. If economic reforms fail to reduce poverty 40% below $2.15 per day, protests could escalate, risking his 2026 re-election. The IMF warns of a lost decade risk for sub-Saharan Africa, with Zambia's 2.8% growth lagging behind population growth. Governance. Hichilema's anti-corruption drive and institutional reforms, like empowering the Anti-Corruption Commission, align with his campaign promises. However, judicial stagnation and opposition arrests undermine democratic gains. The public sector wage bill, at 60% of expenditure, limits fiscal flexibility, and austerity measures risk social unrest, as seen in Kenya's 2023 protests. Strengthening the Electoral Commission of Zambia, ECZ, and ensuring free 2026 elections will be critical to counter accusations of authoritarianism. Failure to address ethnic tensions could exacerbate regional divisions, weakening national cohesion. Foreign policy. Hichilema's positive neutrality positions Zambia as a regional leader, with strong Western ties and diversified partnerships. The Lobito Corridor and AfCFTA enhance Zambia's trade role, but reliance on Western aid and IMF conditions risks domestic backlash. The 2025 U.S. aid cuts force a pivot to non-Western partners like Russia or the UAE, though Hichilema avoids the AES's anti-Western stance. Balancing these relations while maintaining sovereignty will be critical, especially as China's creditor leverage persists. Zambia's SADC leadership could mediate ECOWAS-AES tensions, leveraging its neutral stance. Connection to Pan-African leaders like Ibrahim Traoré and the push for African unity. Hichilema and Traoré represent contrasting visions of Pan-Africanism and African unity, shaped by their contexts and leadership styles. Traoré, Burkina Faso's 37-year-old junta leader, embodies a radical, anti-imperialist approach, forging the AES to reject Western influence, expel French troops, and nationalize resources like gold and uranium. His 2024 AES summit speech denounced the pretense of independence granted in the 1960s, accusing ECOWAS of serving Western interests. The AES's exit from ECOWAS in 2025, coupled with a gold-backed currency proposal, challenges neo-colonial structures, inspiring youth across Africa but risking regional fragmentation. Hichilema, a 62-year-old businessman turned president, pursues a pragmatic, cooperative vision of unity through SADC and AU frameworks. His 2022 Australian dollar speech emphasized AFCFTA and regional infrastructure to share prosperity, aligning with Western initiatives like the G7's infrastructure partnership. Unlike Traoré's rejection of the IMF, Hichilema embraces IFI support to stabilize Zambia's economy, viewing economic strength as sovereignty. His vote against Russia's invasion of Ukraine and ties with the EU and US contrast with Traoré's alignment with Russia and China, highlighting a divide between integrationist and revolutionary Pan-Africanism. Shared goals, different methods. Both leaders prioritize economic sovereignty, with Hichilema formalizing mining and Traoré nationalizing it. Both reject dependency, but Hichilema's diplomacy contrasts with Traoré's confrontational coups. Hichilema's focus on SADC and AFCFTA aims for continental trade integration, while Traoré's AES seeks a Sahel-specific bloc free of Western influence. Hichilema's democratic mandate contrasts with Traoré's military rule, which faces criticism for suppressing dissent and delaying elections. Impact on African unity. Hichilema's approach appeals to moderate African leaders in SADC and East Africa, fostering stability and investment. Traoré's radicalism resonates with youth and anti-imperialist movements, as seen in solidarity rallies in London and Bamako. However, the AES's ECOWAS exit risks splitting West Africa, complicating AU unity goals. Hichilema could bridge this divide by mediating ECOWAS AES talks, leveraging Zambia's neutral stance. The 2025 African Economic Outlook warns of funding squeezes, pushing Hichilema toward Traoré's self-reliance rhetoric if Western aid falters. Diaspora perspective. The African diaspora's call for resource control and self-determination aligns with both leaders. Traoré's defiance inspires radical diaspora groups, with ex-posts from @African_stream praising his Sankara-like vision. Hichilema's pragmatic reforms appeal to diaspora investors, but his Western ties draw criticism from Pan-Africanists who see Traoré as a truer anti-imperialist. Hichilema's challenge is to balance these expectations, maintaining Zambia's stability while addressing calls for bolder sovereignty.